This lecture is on Franciscan University of Steubenville philosophy professor Patrick Lee and his article Personhood, Dignity, Suicide, and Euthanasia.
Lee disagrees with those who say that individuals who are permanently unconscious or demented are no longer persons. They say it is wrong to kill people, but their grandfather with severe dementia is no longer the same individual he was before the dementia. The human organism now hooked up to various tubes in the hospital is no longer the same being as the grandfather they knew who was enjoying life before his stroke. Thus, they say it is morally permissible to withdraw hydration and nutrition because keeping this organism alive is futile, because it is not a person.
What was grandfather then before he had his stroke and was alive and conscious? Lee says a popular argument in favor of euthanasia is implicit denial that we are bodily beings, that we're mere consciousnesses who have bodies. Thus, grandfather existed before he had his stroke, but then ceased to exist once he no longer had the ability to regain the kind of consciousness he had before the stroke. Lee says that this argument is wrong. Lee says that human beings are not mere consciousnesses who have bodies. Human beings are living, organic animals. Rational animals, but animals nevertheless. We are truly human physical organisms. Lee says when this physical organism comes to be, I come to be. I continue to exist as the same human organism until the human organism ceases to be. This is because I am essentially a human organism. Thus, in the case of the grandfather with severe dementia after his stroke, Lee would say before, during, and after the stroke, grandfather is still the same person, and that grandfather only ceases to exist once his bodily self ceases to exist. Lee believes there seems to be an immediate awareness that we are living bodies. For example, when I take a shower, I say, I am washing myself. If I accidentally knock over a vase and it shatters, I don't say, my body did that, but I'm sorry, I broke your vase. I don't have a body as some kind of outer shell of myself. I am a body, says Lee.
Now there are those who grant that an unconscious or severely demented human being is the same individual who was a valuable being with rights a few weeks ago before their stroke, but argue that this same individual is no longer a valuable being with rights due to an inability to be self-conscious. Thus, they argue grandfather, at the time he was playing golf a week before his stroke, is the same individual as grandfather a week after his stroke in a severely demented state. However, a difference between grandfather a week before the stroke and a week after the stroke, when he is in a severely demented state, is grandfather was an objectively valuable being with rights a week before the stroke, and a week after the stroke is no longer an objectively valuable being with rights. Is it possible to lose your objective value and human rights after having them for a significant period of time? Lee says no. Lee believes a person's objective value and human rights are intrinsic to an individual, so they cannot be lost or taken away. Lee points out the incorrect view that exercising self-consciousness is solely what gives a human objective value and rights entails the counterintuitive implication that humans gain and lose objective value and rights throughout the week based on whether the individual at the moment is conscious or not. Lee utilizes the example that human beings sleep. Would it not still be wrong to kill a human being while they are sleeping? Clearly it would be. But severely demented human beings, or human beings in a so-called persistent vegetative state, are in situations not significantly morally different from people while they are in a deep sleep, since neither are exercising self-consciousness.
Lee says the best explanation to explain that sleeping human beings have rights, even though they do not exercise self-consciousness while sleeping, is due to the kind of being they are. Thus, severely demented human beings still have intrinsic value and rights like all other people, even though they do not exercise self-consciousness. Lee says it's always wrong to intentionally kill someone. The purpose of our decisions, says Lee, is to choose legitimate intrinsic goods that perfect us as people. To act against an intrinsic good of your own or another is always wrong. The reason why suicide and euthanasia are wrong is that they are choices contrary to the intrinsic good of a human person. Human life is a fundamental intrinsic human good, and we ought to respect this good. Lee says it doesn't follow that we have to take all measures possible to preserve someone's life. While it is always morally wrong to intentionally kill a human person, it is sometimes morally right to choose not to use certain means to preserve someone's life because of the heavy burden involved. For example, someone with cancer may choose not to do chemotherapy because it offers little chance of bringing complete recovery, is quite expensive, and would block spending time with one's family. It can be morally permissible to choose one intrinsic good over another intrinsic good. Someone who chooses not to receive chemotherapy in order to fulfill responsibilities to their family or community is not intending to kill themselves. They are choosing certain goods, like family relationships, and viewing their diminished health as an unintended side effect. There are those who would object that continuing to exist is not a good in every case, but in some cases actually an evil because of the suffering involved. Lee says this thinking that life is only good if it brings about pleasurable sensations is rooted in a hedonistic value framework. It is mistaken because the goodness or badness of our life and decisions is rooted in our flourishing as human beings, not the degree of pleasure we feel.